my name is Jhon Croft. We're here talking about the nature of dragon dreaming, which is a way of running projects that make your dreams come true. One of the things about dragon dreaming, and this is the reason why it's called dreaming, is that every single project that has ever been done on this planet has started as the dream of just one person. And that while the project starts as the dream of one person, to make your dreams come true, it can't stay that way. The first thing, if you're really serious about making your dreams come true, is you need to share your dreams. And in fact, what you need to do is you need to build a team, a dream team around your dream that will support you in making that dream come true. But most people don't share their dreams. You start with 1,000 dreams. 90% of those projects get stuck in the dreaming stage. So you finish up with 100 plans. You have 100 plans. 90% of those projects don't work according to plan. So you finish up with 10 projects that are in fact done. And then 90% of those don't last longer than 3 years. It means that only 1 in 1,000 dreams comes true. And we know this. You know this. And so we believe that dreams don't come true. And what happens is people lose their dream. And when you lose your dream, according to the book of Micah in the Bible, the people who lose their dream, they perish. Australian Aboriginal people say that a culture that loses its dreaming has lost part of its soul. When people lose their dream, they stop living and they start merely existing. And you can see this. You go out into the streets at peak hour, look into the faces of the people, and what you see in the face is a kind of quiet desperation. The symptoms of soul loss are apathy, fatalism, feeling of powerlessness, a shortening of the future horizon, living from day to day, blaming others, blaming yourself, an endless search for short-term happiness, addictive behaviour, endless consumerism, the belief that if only you had a little bit more, you'd be happy. These are the symptoms of soul loss. And what dragon dreaming does, by enabling us to reconnect with our dreams and make them come true, we rediscover that we are more than who we think we are. You see, who you are in life is a product of the projects that you have done. It's the projects that we do that gives life its meaning, that gives meaning to life. And so what we need to do is to rediscover how to make our dreams come true. And we can't do this playing win-lose games. You know, if the dreamers and the doers and the planners and the celebrators are fighting and playing win-lose games, the project won't work. We need each other. We need to recognise that our differences are our greatest resource, not a source of conflict. How do we do this? It needs the win-win approach. So what we do in dragon dreaming is we take a project and we turn it into a board game. And by getting a team of people to come together and play that game, when that game is finished, the project is complete and people's dreams have come true. All around the world, using dragon dreaming, there are a large number of projects being done, probably about somewhere between 1 and 2,000. We're still currently unsure of the number. Collecting the data about projects is always a problem. The projects range in scale. Successful big projects grow out of successful little projects, and there's a lot of little projects that are being done. For example, there was a project being done of trying to build community within a street. And what happened was there was a woman who was really committed to the fact that frogs are disappearing all around the world. And so what she did she built a frog pond in her garden, and that was her project. And she spoke about her neighbours, about the fact that frogs were disappearing. And there was one neighbour who came to her and was almost in tears, and he was an Italian. He came to her and he was almost in tears, and he said, "Look, I've had 3 frogs sitting on my hot water system all winter, and they've gone. Can you give me 3 frogs back again?" And she said, "No, I can't do that, but I can show you how to build a frog-friendly garden." And so she showed him how to build a frog-friendly garden. And as a result, she built a frog pond in his garden, and he, was being Italian, built a marble frog pond with a fountain in the middle of it. But as a result of this, what happened was really intriguing, because there were 19 frog ponds built in that street, and it was the frogs that began the process of neighbours speaking to each other again. So it was a frog-led community recovery project. Now that was a very small project, and it was a huge success. There was another town in which one person had tried to make himself completely energy self-reliant. And he realised that this was not possible so long as the whole town was still using fossil fuels. And so what he did, he decided he was going to build a community-owned electric wind farm, the first in Australia. It's a project that they have now installed the wind generators. It was a project that took 10 years to accomplish. But now there's a community in which 80% of that community is now self-reliant on renewable energies. And that was a bigger project. There was, in Ghana, there is a university. And this university is the closest to a sustainable university anywhere in the world. All of the water that's used at that university is recycled and used to grow food for 5,000 students. And the methane digesters from the composting toilets of that university is used to cook the food for 5,000 students and staff. And they wanted to run a conference on how for other African universities to become sustainable in Ghana. They used Dragon Dreaming as the tool to plan their conference. The conference was held in 2009, and staff and people from all around Africa came to Valley View University in Ghana to learn how to make their university sustainable as well. In the University of Viçosa, the students there organised a conference in agroecology. And they got a Dragon Dreamer, who was a staff member of the university, to come and teach them how to use Dragon Dreaming to plan that conference. The conference was so successful that the staff of the university, who were amazed at the students who organised this conference, how successfully the conference went, they wanted to learn Dragon Dreaming too. And so at a staff in service course, they got one of the staff to come and teach them Dragon Dreaming. And they're now starting to use Dragon Dreaming inside the courses at the university. As a result of this, of the University of Viçosa, one of the students used Dragon Dreaming as the organising principles for their doctorate, and she's now got a doctorate using Dragon Dreaming. They have taken Dragon Dreaming now into the Amazon rainforest, and it's now being used for planning sustainability of rainforest areas within the Amazon, in the Amazonas state of Brazil. We discovered recently at the Global Eco Village Network conference, where Dragon Dreaming has been taught for the last 6 years, the biggest Dragon Dreaming project worldwide was organised by Nara Petrovic, who was a person who learned Dragon Dreaming at a Global Eco Village Network conference and took it to Slovenia. There, they mobilised 300,000 people to come together for one day to clean up the whole country of Slovenia. 300,000 people, it's 15% of the total population of the country, for one day. And even the president of Slovenia put on gloves and got a plastic bag and went out and helped to collect rubbish. Dragon Dreaming projects work on all different kinds of scales, from the very small to the very large. But this is the way in which projects can make a difference in their community. We have projects that at the World Climate Conference in Copenhagen, there was a third conference held that was simultaneous to the big international conference called Climate Bottom, that was organised originally using dragon dreaming. Dragon dreaming can be used at any scale. It's a tool of techniques that can be used to build win-win games. It is a way of building a new culture, a win-win culture to replace the win-lose culture that we're living in at the moment. It is a design philosophy for building outrageously successful projects and organisations. It is a toolbox of tips and techniques that can be adapted to be used in individual projects of all different kinds. And it is a community of practitioners that support each other in celebration to support the growth of these sorts of things. What we need is a threefold plan. A project that builds personal growth for the people involved, that builds community in whichever way we design and whatever community is, a project that works in service to the earth. And if we can do those three things, the changes that we need worldwide can in fact occur, because we can liberate the collective intelligence of our planet. What is the Great Turning? We're living through the third great turning in the history of humankind on planet Earth. The first great turning began about 10,000 years ago, and it was linked to the shift from being a hunter and gatherer culture into being farmers and living in cities. And as of October 2007, for the first time in the history of the world, now 50% of the population of the planet live in a city. That's never happened before. So the first great turning has taken us 10,000 years. The second great turning began about 600 years ago in Sagres in Portugal, where the Prince of Portugal brought together scholars and scientists, Arabs, Christians and Jews, to build the best ships in the world. And it began the scientific and technological revolution that we're still living through today. Now the third great turning is different than the first two, because unlike the first two, it's not based on growth. It's based on how do we shift a culture that is based on permanent growth into being a culture that sustains complex life on the planet. What is happening right now is that there is what is called a global problematique, a series of issues that are piling up together and which are not being resolved. For example, we've all heard of climate change. That's a huge issue and it's of a growing importance. We've all heard of the loss of biodiversity. The latest figures from the UN show that every day we are losing 100 species from the planet, becoming extinct. Everybody has suffered in some way as a result of the world financial crisis. The fact that in 2007 the United States went into a nosedive and it dragged the rest of the planet with it. These problems are not solved. And the reason why they're not solved is because the organisations that we depend on, for example, the national governments, what they're saying at the moment is, look, we can't give attention to climate change unless the electorate gives us the mandate. Corporations are saying we can't solve these problems unless there's a market for renewable and sustainable products. And the community is saying we want the governments and the corporations to solve the problems for us. And so we're drifting. We're drifting towards unparalleled disaster. Now, many people worldwide know this. And there's two different kinds of responses. One kind of response is the response that comes when information seems to be overwhelming, that it's all too hard and too difficult to deal with. And faced with the problems of day-to-day life, these people repress the awareness of what's happening, and by that repression, they just live from day to day. And that seems to be the dominant response of our time. The second response is the response of the cultural creatives. And these people are busy trying to make a difference in the way in which we live our lives. In Dragon Dreaming, we found that Dragon Dreaming appeals first of all to the activists, to those people who are really wanting to make a difference in the future for their children and for their children's children. But the problem is how do we create the projects? You see, we live in a culture that is based on win-lose games, in which there are winners and there are losers. And the problem with the win-lose game in the world at the moment is that most of the win-lose games that our culture is playing finish up producing lose-lose outcomes, in which everybody finishes up being a loser. You can see this unfolding in the Middle East, where win-lose games are being played all the time. And everybody finishes up being worse off than they were before the game began. Now what that means is that we need a different way of playing the game. And the different way of playing the game in Dragon Dreaming is that we need to shift our cultural understandings away from lose-lose to win-win. It means we have to achieve 100% of your dreams and 100% of my dreams if we're truly going to build a win-win sustainable project together. Now what that means is that Dragon Dreaming is a way of making people's dreams come true. We have had in Australia, over the 23 years before Dragon Dreaming left Australia, 611 community projects that were done through the Gaia Foundation of Western Australia that pioneered the Dragon Dreaming approach. Not one of those projects failed. Not one of those projects ran at a loss. They all covered their costs. The projects may have evolved during the course of the project, but not one project failed. This is what can happen if you build a win-win culture. And so what Dragon Dreaming is at this level is appealing to the cultural creatives, the 23% of the population, who are aware that we're living in changing times, who are aware that the pace of change is accelerating, and it's accelerating faster than our communities can cope with. It's accelerating faster than our ecosystems can cope with, and in fact it's accelerating faster than our bodies can cope with. I went to Germany to work with a particular teacher who was one of the inspirers of Dragon Dreaming, because Dragon Dreaming is based on the work of experiential deep ecology, particularly the work of Joanna Macy. Joanna is an inspired teacher. She's a Buddhist scholar. She's an anti-nuclear activist. She is in her 80s now, but she's still active, teaching all around the world. And what Joanna says is that what we see as apathy in the community is not really apathy. What Joanna says is that what we see as apathy in the world is unresolved grief. We are aware of the problems that we're facing in the world. It's not information that we lack. We get reminded every day of things like climate change, economic crisis, resource depletion, extinction of species. All the information is out there. It's not information that people lack. What people lack, Joanna believes, and I strongly agree with her, is that we lack awareness of the way to deal with the feelings that come up when we're exposed to this information. And what people do when they're exposed to this information, what they do, most people, is that they emotionally shut down. The feelings of fear, of anger or rage or grief or sorrow, they do not know how to deal with these feelings. And so they suppress the awareness of these feelings and try and cope on a day-to-day basis. Now, the way in which we are organised psychologically is you cannot shut down your negative emotions without shutting down your positive emotions at the same time. Emotions are emotions, and if you shut down half of your emotional life, you're shutting down 100%. And so what happens with this is that people come to live in emotional flatland. As you're suppressing your grief and your sorrow, what you're doing is you're suppressing your feelings of love, because grief and sorrow comes out of what you've loved and lost. So you suppress grief, you're suppressing love. If you're suppressing fear, what you're doing is you're suppressing your courage. The person who's totally fearless is not courageous. True courage is feeling the fear and being able to act anyway. So as you suppress your feelings of fear, you're suppressing your feelings of courage. What we're doing by suppressing these negative feelings is we're suppressing our joy. We're suppressing our enthusiasm. And we come to live in this area of emotional flatland, which is characterized by a slow slide into permanent depression. You see, we need these emotions because these emotions give us information that we urgently need. This information is information that we can get in no other way. We evolved the capacity to feel these emotions over 150 million years because they give us information that we need for our survival. It's interesting, the Vietnamese Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh, who was nominated by Martin Luther King for the Nobel Peace Prize, was once asked, what is the most important thing we need to do at the moment in dealing with the global problematic, the problems that we're facing worldwide? And they expected him to say something like, solve the population problem, or deal with endless consumerism, or help fix the environment. And what he said stunned everyone, because what he said was we need to hear within ourselves the sound of the earth crying. You see, the blockage to every project comes from separation. It's the feeling that we are separate from the world that is the source of a lot of the problems that we face. It is the feelings that we are separate from our community that causes a lack of trust. And with the lack of trust in each other, in ourselves, comes a rising fear. And with that uncontrollable feeling of fear comes the feeling that I am going to lose. And it's that feeling that creates the win-lose games on which our education systems, our healthcare systems, our political systems, our legal and justice systems, our economic system is based. These are all win-lose games. That there are winners and there are losers. And I need to be on the winning side. I need to avoid being on the losing side. And so long as we are playing these win-lose games, we see each other as a threat. We see the world as a threat. We see the world itself as an alien place that we need to take control of if we are to survive. But the reality is we are not separate. We're not separate from the world. We're not separate from each other. We are not separate from ourselves. And by staying in this awareness of connection, that we have the place in which we can stand, we can act, and we discover that these feelings are not threats. They give us back our life. They give us the motivation in which we can act and we can change. The question I've just been asked is, what is the spiritual nature, or the spiritual roots, if you like, of the dragon dreaming approach? The world out there is so big and so huge and so frightening, and for me in here, it can seem that it's a frightening place. And so from that separation comes a fear, an existential fear about survival. And as a result of that fear, what we do is we are afraid that we are going to lose. We'll lose ourselves, we'll lose our lives, we'll lose who we are. And that fear of loss is what drives the win-lose game. What we need to recognize is that we are not separate. We're not separate within ourselves, we're not separate from our communities, and we're not separate from the world. And if we can come from not just a recognition of that separation, but out of an experience of the connectivity, then we can act in the world in a way. We can act as a result out of permanent love. You see, unconditional loving comes from being always there. And what is always there, always, is the world itself. And if we can act out of that place, then we can find a way to build win-win. But at the same time as that, we live in a culture, and it's a culture that's built around win-lose. And we have been programmed through our experiences in that culture. And those programmings are little voices in the head that are making judgments all the time. They're making judgments about you, they're making judgments about myself, they're making judgments about our communities, and they're making judgments about the world. And we have to have a technique that enables us to silence those inner voices. Because through silencing those inner voices, we can get in touch with a larger reality of who and what we are. And the way in which I do this through Dragon Dreaming comes from Aboriginal spirituality in Australia. It comes out of the Madhu Mandjilajara people of the Great Sandy Desert. They talk about Pinakari. Other people talk about Dandiri, but it's the same thing. Pinakari is a concept that exists in Aboriginal culture that doesn't have an exact translation in European languages. But the closest we can get to it is the deeper listening. Now, we do the deeper listening not just through our ears. The deeper listening is a listening in which we allow us to actually hear the earth itself speak through us. Because who am I? Who am I right now? Jhon Croft, who's sitting here talking to Rita, I am the whole world having a Jhon experience. We are a temporary node in a process of flow. There's not a single molecule of water. 70% of my body is water. There's not a single molecule of water in my body right now that was there a month ago. I am replacing myself all the time. And I'm replacing my ideas. I'm replacing my awareness. I am a flow, a process of flow. And this is who and what is real. And if I can get in touch with this process of flow, what I can find is what is it that abides? What is it that is permanent? And what is permanent is the flow itself. This flow had a beginning and it'll have an end. It began with the beginning of time and it'll end with the end of time. And I am a part of that flow. I am not separate from it, and I can never be separated from it. But I can believe myself to be separated from it as a result of my consciousness and as a result of my thinking. But through engagement with others and through engagement in the world, I can demonstrate to myself and I can demonstrate to others that that separateness that we fear is an illusion. It's that separateness that is the illusion, and through realizing the illusory nature of that separateness and coming back constantly to the larger connection of which I am, and the way in which that I have access to a wisdom and a knowledge that is billions of years old. It's the wisdom and the knowledge of the earth itself. And through the earth itself, it's the wisdom of the knowledge of the entire universe. That we are one. We're not separate. We are connected in ways we don't know all the time. And by acting out of that connectivity, coming back to the connection all the time, to reconnect is the source of the spirituality. It's not matter and spirit separate. They are connected.